I think the biggest thing is to have at least one person on your team, if not more, that is going to shoot you straight. People don't tell the emperor when there's no clothes, and you got to have some people you really trust.
Welcome to NYC Ground, the podcast for curious startup founders.
I woke up the next morning with one of those thoughts that a lot of entrepreneurs have, which is just like, what is going on?
In each episode, I dive deep into the learnings and mistakes made by the world-class investors and operators who have helped make the New York City tech ecosystem what it is today.
How do you think about building brands?
Brands are proxies for trust.
This week, I speak with Capsule CEO and founder, Eric Kinariwala. He's the CEO and founder of Capsule, a New York-based pharmaceutical delivery startup. It's been nearly a decade since he started the company, so I wanted to talk to him a little bit about what he's learned along that journey, how his leadership style has evolved throughout the years, and how his learnings have helped build the company into what it is today.
Eric, thanks so much for joining me. I'm really excited to have this conversation.
Thanks for having me.
Before we kick off, a lot of exciting topics that I want to cover with you. But first, tell us a little bit about your background for those that may not know, and a little bit more about Capsule.
So Capsule is the simplest way to get and manage your medications. And we work with consumers, doctors, and other stakeholders across the healthcare ecosystem. And I started the business in 2015, coming out of what I thought was literally the world's worst trip to the drugstore. I'm sure you've had that for yourself, for your family, and so many others have. And I'll spare you the gory details, but it's a chain pharmacy down on the Lower East Side where I was living, and I had woken up one morning with a sinus infection, called my doctor. He said, "Hey, don't worry about it. I'll call a prescription, go get it." I was like, perfect. And so I went out on this cold, snowy January morning, and I get to this pharmacy, and the first thing is like, I can't even find the actual pharmacy. I'm walking through aisles of toilet scrubber and toothpaste and no pharmacy. So anyway, I finally figure out it's in the basement, this dark, dingy basement. There's like 40 people in line ahead of me. My cell phone's not working because it's in the basement. And long story short, I end up waiting in line for an hour, get to the counter, and they're out of stock of my prescription. Can't get a hold of my doctor to call it in somewhere else because my cell phone has died searching for signal. And anyway, went home, no medication in hand. And I woke up the next morning with one of those thoughts that a lot of entrepreneurs have, which is just like, what is going on and how does this work?
Yeah.
And that was really the spark for me to start unpacking my own experience. And I'd spent the early part of my career as an investor, investing in healthcare, retail, and tech. And pretty quickly, as I started digging into the pharmacy industry, I realized that it was sitting at the intersection of these two very big themes that I was excited about as an investor. One is this idea that consumer preferences for how we interact with local retail are shifting. This is, about 9 years ago, are shifting to be on your phone first.
Right.
So this is when, things like Uber and Instacart and DoorDash and Seamless and all of these things had really sort of started taking mainstream consumer adoption. So our view is that non-experiential local retail is going to live on your phone. And what you'll see on storefronts on street corners, there are going to be bars and salons and restaurants and cinemas and things that have experiences, but everything else can live on your phone. So that was one. And the second is something I've been really interested in since 2010, which is, Obamacare was this pretty impactful legislation, and not in the way that I think it's talked about in the popular press, but in terms of the catalyst towards changing the way that every participant in the healthcare system gets paid.
Right.
If you kind of think about the way it is today, it's a little bit silly. Like, your doctor makes more money the more often you go see him, and that's like not a great incentive structure. The incentive structure should really be your doctor gets paid, and if he keeps you healthy, great, and if not, with that money, he's got to get better. And that's the world that, that's value-based care is sort of what is started to take hold the last 5 or 7 years.
Can potentially be dangerous too, right? Like, you're seeing your doctor and they're like, "Hey, you're fine."
Totally. There's, like everything, there's puts and takes to it. And so anyway, the pharmacy sits at the intersection of these two really big themes. The pharmacy's the second largest category of retail. It's $450 billion. And the pharmacy is the most frequent interaction that anybody has in the healthcare system. The average person engages with the pharmacy 10 times more often than their doctor. And so kind of was able to combine, this very personal experience I had and quickly kind of understand what are the business mechanics behind it. And I thought, I always say, like, when your head and your heart align around something, that's the time to kind of jump off the cliff. And so that's the story.
Makes sense. I love the story. It's sort of a villain arc for becoming a startup founder. It's like this horrible experience, and you're going to be like, I'm going to change this. I'm going to do it myself.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's awesome.
And it's in much need of change.
Yeah. 100%. So you started in 2015. We're in 2024. I'm curious, like you as a startup founder, how have you evolved as a leader? Like what's different about Eric today than when you were starting the company in the first couple years?
Yeah. Aside from my beard has started to gray a little bit, I think the biggest thing on the leadership side of it is I'm a first-time founder, and one of the things that I think in the very early days is you're still finding your footing on how to be a leader and what kind of leader you want to be. And you've got a lot of people in your ear. You've got your team, you've got advisors. If you have a coach, you've got your investors and your board. And I think that ultimately you have to kind of find your own authentic way, because it's really hard to show up every day at the intensity and the hours that early stage companies require to be successful, to do anything but that. There's this great series of, it's either a blog post or a series of tweets from, I think, the former CTO of Spotify. And it basically talks about this idea of autonomy versus alignment. And that's been a really powerful thing for me to internalize and also for me to share with the team.
Right.
And I think that one of the things early on that is sort of easy to fall into is either this like, I'm going to be involved in like every detail.
Right.
And it becomes overbearing for really talented people on your team. Or you shift the pendulum to this, I think, misguided advice around like hire great people and get out of their way, which is effectively like abdication, not delegation.
Why is it misguided?
Because your job is not to abdicate responsibility.
Yeah.
And there's a difference between abdication and delegation. And even very talented people, like you're the founder for a reason. You have a unique insight about the world, and you think about the problem, the company, and the customer, hopefully more than anybody. And so you have really valuable uniquely valuable knowledge and insights to be able to support your team in being successful, regardless of how experienced the person that you've brought on and asked to join your team is. And so this idea of autonomy versus alignment, and by the way, the flip side goes too. A lot of folks join startups from any variety of previous companies, and they're like, oh, I'm doing this because I don't like working in the big hierarchy of, JP Morgan or Walmart or whatever. The startup's going to be great. I'm going to be able to have all this autonomy. And that's not really what creates success. I think my view is that what you want is alignment. And that alignment comes through really frequent short burst communication. Yeah. And so it's not about checking in with your manager or your boss because you want permission to do things. It's how do I really work with my manager or my boss as a partner and solicit them to help me do my job more successfully,
right?
But not make my job their job.
Right.
And so this idea of alignment, which comes through frequent interaction, just means we're on the same page all the time. We have this idea of shared consciousness. And so that you know what I know and I know what you know, and together we're attacking and slaying the, hopefully massive problem that we've set out to do. And
that makes sense.
That sort of concept doesn't exist if you're quote unquote autonomous, which is basically sitting in a corner, coming back in a month or a quarter after your project. The business moves.
It's like it'd be going in the complete.
Yeah, the business
direction.
moves so fast, right? So you need to continuously be calibrating and sharing learnings and insights, because there's insights that your manager is going to have that you don't have, and there's insights you have that your manager is not going to have. And so making sure those things stay aligned at all times so that everyone's running in the same direction, I think has been a real change in terms of kind of finding that footing over the last many years.
Is there anything about leadership that you feel like you're still learning as you go 10 years in?
Everything. I think that leadership evolves. I think your operating cadence as a leader evolves. I think your style evolves, and hopefully you're getting better at the things that are required to be an excellent leader, because you're getting feedback, because you're incorporating that feedback and working every day, every week to just be a better leader. But I also think that companies at different stages need different types of leadership. And so some of it is, can I get better at the thing I'm doing now?
Yeah.
And some of it is, okay, the company needs a different kind of leader right now. Do I have those skills? Can I develop those skills? Can I unleash those things? And so how do you kind of build, like the complete toolkit for being able to solve or attack or lead in any situation?
That makes sense. That makes me think of one other question is, if you had to consider for a CEO, their NPS score from other executives on the team, what are the qualities or the practices that can help increase that NPS score for the executives that you hire or work for?
I think one thing that universally I found is people want to know you have their back.
Yeah.
And that is something that's really hard to fake. And so you got to have your team's back. And that can mean a lot of different things. Different leaders different executives need different things. And so understanding what are their unique strengths, and then where can you actually be supportive to them? Where can you complement them as a partner? And so I think about, every one of the members of our executive teams as my partner in building our business.
Yeah.
And like every partnership, whether it was me and you, or it's anybody else, like it's going to look unique based on the kind of our relationship, our dynamic, and the unique strengths that, our duo brings together. So that's kind of how I think about it.
That makes sense.
Yeah.
So you mentioned you are a first-time founder and you're building in a highly regulated, very complicated space. What misunderstood aspects of building in healthcare could first-time founders who want to build in the space misunderstand or not take into consideration?
Yeah, maybe two things. One is that healthcare is, I don't know, like $4 or $5 trillion. So there is no such thing as healthcare. Healthcare is made up of many submarkets. And I think as you keep clicking down, you continue to learn that. And so a good example for us would be one of the ways we go to market is through physicians.
Yeah.
And there are, I believe, 1 million physicians in America. Easy to think about 1 million physicians as a homogenous block that you can go and market to and sell to. But it turns out it's not 1 million physicians.
Right.
It's, 50 segments or 100 segments of 1,000 physicians. And so then you have to keep double clicking and really understand your customer. And I think healthcare in some ways, because the markets are so big, because it touches everybody, that I think that can be a blessing and a curse in terms of it enables you to have huge impact on people, on society, if you can build and bring to market a really compelling product. It also means that creating narrow focus to start is really important. And so that balance of, the prescription market, the pharmacy market's $400 billion. But in reality, it's comprised of a bunch of submarkets.
Yeah.
And sure, 70% of American adults go to the pharmacy once a month. That's literally everybody in America.
Yeah.
And so how do you kind of start breaking that problem down so you can actually start making progress on it in some sort of sequential way? That's one. And then I think the second thing in healthcare is that almost all healthcare businesses, not all, but almost all, are multi-stakeholder in such that usually the person that is paying for the product or service is not the person that's consuming it. And often there's a third party, which is the person that is authorizing you or recommending that you purchase or have this product or service is different from the person receiving the product or service, is different for the person paying for that product and service. And so understanding what are the actual incentives across these stakeholders as you build a product is really important. I think you can build the world's best consumer healthcare experience, but if the person that needs to recommend it or pay for it doesn't find value in it, you're not going to get very far. But the flip is, you can build products that create tons of value for people that pay for it, but if the end consumer finds it not particularly compelling, that's also not going to get a lot of traction. So you got to kind of find that, the alignment across these different stakeholders. And I think that's pretty unique relative to most other categories where you can go to a single person, they're the buyer, and they're also going to use the product, and they're also the decision maker. And so
Did that make like user testing more complex for you in the beginning?
I think it makes go-to-market more complicated in terms of, do you need to build products for your channel to be able to drive distribution? So our business is ultimately a consumer business.
Yeah.
Consumers use the pharmacy, but there are a lot of other stakeholders in there. Well, consumer uses the pharmacy, but gosh, like the time that you really think about the pharmacy is when you're at the doctor's office.
Yeah.
Okay, so what are the physician and her staff's friction points there? Do you need to build products to solve that problem? So is your business actually B2C or is it B2B2C? And I think having clarity and understanding which of those it is, and then how do you kind of work backwards from the strategy is maybe counterintuitive.
Did you ever or did you think about like your choice of a regulated, difficult, complex industry as potentially a moat for you once you figured it out?
Hey, before we get to their answer, I want to take a quick second to just thank everybody that's been a part of the NYC round journey so far. If you've enjoyed these conversations we've been having with investors and founders, like, subscribe, and comment down below. Now back to the conversation.
I think a lot of categories in healthcare, and I can only speak to the pharmacy prescription industry. I think the prescription industry is probably the most opaque, complex industry in America.
Yeah.
I'm 8 years in, and I'm genuinely still learning about different pockets of how things work and how payment flows work. And there is an enormous amount of complexity. And I think that complexity is deliberate in terms of that complexity has been a moat for the incumbents in the category. And so I think the first step is, do you understand the complexity? Can you wrap your head around it? And then can you understand how that graphs onto like your unique insight into how you want to kind of upend it? But yeah, I think that there is for sure, there is absolutely, I think, a moat around complexity, around regulation, all of those things. So that if you can get over the hump on those things and you can kind of look in the rearview mirror and saying, yeah, we solved these things, we have a really good process for them and we understand it, then I think it makes it harder for others to come behind you.
That makes sense.
And then hopefully there are companies that are working on solving that problem outright that are reducing the like barrier to getting involved in healthcare, because I think there's a lot of opportunity, and I suspect financial services are, not dissimilar in terms of the regulatory complexity and compliance requirements.
You've built a really strong brand, and it's been 9-10 years since you started. I'm curious if there were ever any moments similar to like why you started it, the bad days, like where you considered like giving up, and like how did you navigate that and overcome that feeling?
Yeah, I think there's always ups and downs, right? I think there are, great days, and there are like subpar days, and there are great weeks, and there are subpar weeks. The thing that I always come back to, I love reading and interacting with our customers. Mm-hmm. And so when I have a visceral belief and conviction, having spoken with, tens of thousands or read tens of thousands of reviews of our customers over time, like people love the product. And so that's like, on your worst day, you can still wake up and say, the product is creating value. It's making someone's life better. And they genuinely like using it. And I think that is actually the hardest thing to build. And I think if you have that, you can solve for lots of other things. But if you don't have a product that people genuinely find value in and love, it's hard over time to fix all the other things that need to get built and fixed.
That makes sense. Shifting gears a little bit. So I'm a marketer. So another reason why I was excited to have this conversation is because I can't think of another brand, like maybe there's like ZocDoc. It's all healthcare related, really. Since I've been in New York for 8 years, Capsule and ZocDoc, those are the brands that have been most like present in my life, whether it's the trains, out of home. How do you think about building brands? And if you were to write down your thoughts on how brand marketing works, what would you say?
Sure. So kind of two pieces. One is like, what is brand?
Yeah.
And we think about brand, or I think about brand as brands are proxies for trust. And if you kind of, not to get academic about it, but if you go all the way back to the origin of the word brand, it was when you used to brand cattle, right? This is a high quality steer. because it's got the brand of whatever ranch is known for high quality. And so when you kind of think about brands are about trust, and trust comes, we think, from two things. We think about brand as basically three components, right? There's how you look, which is what most people think about brand as. It's like, oh, this has really cool design. I think that's 10% of brand. The second is how you sound. What's the tone of voice? You have a marketing agency, you develop your own voice, you have a copywriter. Like, does your brand have a distinct voice? Nike has a distinct voice.
Right.
That's maybe 20, 30% of your brand. And then for a brand that's a service brand or has a human component to it, I think how you act is
That's like
70% of your brand, right? And so we can have the most beautiful, delightful, visually appealing design. We can have the cleverest, wittiest copy, but if you pick up the phone and you call someone at Capsule and they don't convey like the love that the brand stands for, it will feel completely inauthentic, and it doesn't work. And so we've always talked about this idea of building emotionally resonant brands, and that brands have to be internally and externally aligned with the values of the company.
Right.
And I think that's the most important thing, is that the external manifestation of your values as a company is your brand, and the internal are, what are your operating principles, what are your values. And so I think about brand marketing as the external manifestation of the company's values. And for healthcare, and for our company specifically, the reason we think it's important to build a brand is if you're asking someone to switch their most frequent interaction in healthcare.
Right.
And so it's a high trust endeavor. And we've always believed you need to build trust, awareness, and credibility to get people comfortable in doing that. And so for us, creating that trust, awareness, and credibility across all of our stakeholders, around consumers, around doctors, around insurance companies, all that, the brand marketing has created that trust, awareness, and credibility, and I think has been a really good investment. But ultimately for us, it's about the external manifestation of the values of the company.
How do you have that conversation with like a CFO who wants to see like dollars in equals dollars out and may not like completely understand the picture of brand awareness versus demand gen activities?
But everything has to tie to the P&L. Yeah. I mean, it's not, like, I think as a marketer who's advocating for, a diverse channel mix, whether that's around performance marketing, it's around brand marketing, it's around comms and PR.
Yeah.
Ultimately, everything has to show a return. I think one is what is the time horizon of that return? And two, how do you measure that? But there's a good, I don't know where I saw it, there's a good study somewhere that shows in most categories, brand awareness leads market share. Mm-hmm. And so you can kind of spend time, depends on who your CFO is. Yeah. You can spend time on kind of saying, hey, look, like, if we can create this level of awareness in our category, we want to get to 10%, 20%, 30% aided awareness. Here's a bunch of historical examples of how that leads 9, 12, 24 months later that you're going to see like market share in your category shift. And I think that broadly, proves out. I think there's art to it too. Yeah. Because, how much should you spend and when should you spend it and in what sort of frequency and depth and all that stuff. I think there's trial and error around that. And it depends on the market, it depends on the media, it depends on the channel.
Are there any mistakes that you think folks make with brand awareness campaigns?
I think the number one mistake, which CFOs are not going to like this, but the number one mistake is that I think I want to distinguish brand marketing from outdoor. Yeah. I think outdoor is like one component of brand marketing. And I think, by the way, all marketing should be brand marketing. Like, you're not going to run, you're not going to run performance marketing that erodes your brand, right? It has to reinforce the messaging. So ultimately, all of this is brand marketing, and it should all work together. We have been believers, right or wrong, that marketing channel attribution is very, very difficult, particularly as you run things that are not directly, totally digital all the time. And so we've always believed that if your objective is to create trust, awareness, and credibility, you need to be surround sound to whomever your customer is. Yeah. And that you need to kind of look at the cost and the output of those things with a couple of different lenses, right? Even like the most down the fairway performance marketing has lots of attribution challenges.
Right.
And so there is a level of false comfort that just because the portal at Google or Facebook or TikTok says that these are the numbers, you know, I don't know, look at 7 days, 14 days, 30 days, 90 days, right? Like all of these different things.
I've seen Capsule ads like 30, 40 times in like the last like 3 years, but unless you asked me, you would know. Yeah, you would have no idea.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. I think it's an important, depends on what your company is, depends on what your objectives are. We've always found it to be an important part of the marketing mix. And we definitely understand like what the returns on it are and over what time horizon.
Speaking of returns and time horizon, your background is as an investor. How do you think that informed your work as an operator now, as a founder?
I think the biggest thing that's a parallel between those two things is that when you're an investor, you're making decisions amid uncertain information and incomplete information. Right? You never have, you're outside in, you're not in the company. You have a very limited set of information and you have a lot of uncertainty and you need to make decisions relatively quickly. And it's literally what you have to do as a founder every day. Right? You want to hire somebody. Okay, you have limited information. You have the ability to do 4 or 5 references. You can do 4 or 5 interviews, and you got to pull the trigger. You want to make a decision on a marketing campaign. Okay, great. You can analyze it for 3 months, or you can pull the trigger and say, let's try it. Let's see what we learn, and let's, you know, iterate and get better. And so I think that muscle of, can you distill down, these are the 1 or 2 things that matter for any decision, and get as comfortable as you can, as quickly as you can, and then make a decision, right? And I think that skill, I certainly was able to develop as an investor and served me pretty well as a founder.
That makes sense. You also got your MBA. How do you feel that helped with your journey as a founder?
I think it primes you for certain things.
Yeah.
You've got a little bit of work experience before business school, but it's a little bit, you know, you're sort of, at least the like classroom portion of it, you're exposed to things that are going to happen later. And so there's a little bit of a pattern match around, gosh, like I remember, you know, 5 years later, you're like, I remember this case, or I remember this professor talking about this thing, and now I understand because I'm in that situation.
Yeah.
And so it creates a little bit of like a priming effect. So you've got a little bit of a muscle memory around that when that situation happens. And then I think, you know, obviously you meet the most wonderful people and have made, you know, some really great friends. And
your network is your net worth, so it comes in handy later.
And you just make genuine friends. And, you know, it's a rare thing in life to be able to kind of unplug for 2 years in the middle of your life and get to spend a lot of time with people that in a pretty unstructured, kind of no agenda setting.
That's awesome.
Yeah.
So in 2015, when you started it started after the story of going to get medication yourself. It was a poor experience. You wanted to change it. Probably like your first couple of users, maybe not, but like friends, family. How did you get the folks? What were the scrappy things that you probably don't have to do today as the CEO and you're very busy, but like what did you have to do in the early days to get your first customers that weren't friends and family?
Yeah, it's kind of an interesting thing. So we had, you know, like an alpha or beta launch like every company, and had a series of friends and family used it, gave us feedback on it. And it turned out that like a couple of those folks were doctors, and they basically, you know, kind of came back to us and said, hey, you know, this is great. I love using this for myself, but gosh, like my staff and I interact with the pharmacy 20 times a day.
Yeah.
I'm going to start recommending this to my patients because I think they would really like it.
Yeah.
And so that was the first sort of set of folks that started using it that weren't people that we kind of at the team knew directly, was doctors starting to refer it.
That's a smart pick, because that's literally finding network nodes that could potentially make it grow like wildfire.
Yeah, absolutely.
Got it. Were there any decisions that you made early on in the journey with Capsule that you think are compounding even today?
I think the biggest thing is maybe back to the brand conversation. I would say the core of the brand is company values and operating principles. And so I think defining what those are early can really help streamline decision making.
Yeah.
Whether that's, should we hire this person? Should we ask them to join the team? Should we ask them to leave the team? There's this opportunity here. It feels kind of, you know, not sure what to do. So I think clarifying what the values of the company are. We have two values. We kept it really simple. One is everybody needs some looking after sometimes.
Yeah.
And the second is winning together.
How are those? How did you land on both of those?
I think some of that, I think the values, like if you're a founder, the values have to be authentic to you.
Yeah.
Right. Like they have to be what do you believe in? And then they have to be aligned with what you believe creates success for your company. And so the values, ultimately, we believe that like if you live these values repeatedly, that it will lead the company to making better decisions that will ultimately ladder up to being successful. So for us, everybody needs some looking after sometimes, is the idea that the external view of that is as a customer, we're always in your corner. We have your back. Healthcare is complicated. Pharmacy is frustrating. We're going to take all of that work off and look after you. Yeah. And internally, what that means is that we're going to enable one another to do the best work of our careers. So my job is to help you do the best work of your career, and your job is to help me do the best work of my career. And so one, those things are internally and externally aligned. And two, I believe that if we are always have our customers back, whether that is an end customer or a doctor, and that the team is continuously enabling each other to do their best work, that will lead to success. And winning together is the idea, again, externally, that Capsule's multi-stakeholder. And so we want to create solutions and products that not only help the consumer be successful, but help the doctor be successful, help the insurance company be successful. Right. And the internal manifestation of that is really that we define winning as accomplishing ambitious objectives. And together is doing that in a way that your success uplifts the people around you and makes them better. And so what we found was that, yeah, there's lots of people that can get ambitious things done, but they're zero sum, I win, you lose. And we decided we don't want those people on the team. And on the flip, there's a lot of people who are really fun to be around and can pump you up, and they never get any shit done. Yeah. We also don't want those people on the team. And so those are the two values and how they come together and how they also ladder into the success of a company in a very specific way.
Were there any like tactical decisions that you made that you maybe regret or look back on and maybe want to go in a different route?
It's funny because every CEO and literally just like everybody gives the same advice. And I think literally every CEO and founder makes the same mistake. So I wish I were unique in that dimension, but I'm not. The biggest thing, I think, tactical early days was that is a little bit of the internalizing that for sure culture is like what you reward and what you promote and what you reject and what you punish. But I think this idea of like, what do you tolerate as a CEO or as a leadership team or as a company actually can more than anything define it, because it's the implicit thing of, well, you're telling me that, we're all about winning together and accomplishing ambitious objectives and doing that way that uplifts others. But you have this person over here who is getting things done, but they're like abrasive, they're very difficult to be around, they're not a team player, like all these things. So should I believe the things that's written on the wall and the things you repeat at all hands? Or should I actually just look at the, observed reality of what you, the CEO, are tolerating? And I think that being hyper attuned to that is really important, because people figure that out and just viscerally understand that. And so for me, it's that specific example, which is you can have just like really talented people in the business and they get a lot done. And that's really like you're so lucky when you find those people at any point in the life cycle of a company, but particularly in the early days, because there's so much to do. Yeah. And yet you have to like move those people out like pretty quickly if they are in any way like not living and operating and showing up in accordance to what the company's values are.
That makes sense. Thank you for sharing. That's awesome. Do you still find that you have room today to make bets as a CEO? Like, how do you manage risk? You're running this very successful company. Brands are earned over years, but they can be lost in like months. Like, how do you manage risk in general? How do you think about it?
Yeah, I mean, we operate in a really regulated industry, and so there's risk everywhere. We think about risk from a first principles perspective, and I think that I really push the team, whether it's our legal team or regulatory team or finance team, whatever, marketing team, and to really kind of come back and say, hey, let's try to quantify this, or let's from our first principles understand, what does this mean that this is risky? What's the upside?
Yeah.
What's the downside? What's the probability that it happens? And let's make an informed decision based on those three things. So there are certain things which are could put us out of business, and they are low frequency events. We generally don't do things like that.
Yeah.
Because even though
What would be an example of that?
like not securing your data in the right way
Gotcha. Okay.
would be something like,
Yeah,
right?
yeah.
What's a first principles risk there?
Right.
It's probably not a great example, and there are other things that you think are, low risk, but could happen with high frequency, right? And so I think it's just categorizing hey, how much does this matter? Is the cost of taking that risk outweigh the benefit of moving whatever you want to do forward?
That makes sense.
Yeah.
You alluded to some of this advice early on when you were talking about folks that are building in healthcare for the first time. It's like the market is massive, so you can make the mistake of oversimplifying or approaching an audience in a broad sense. What other advice do you have for other first-time founders that are out there navigating the founder journey for the first time, that want to be successful and want to have scalable VC-backed businesses that change a lot of lives?
I think the biggest thing is to figure out how to keep learning, and to have at least one person on your team, if not more, that is going to shoot you straight.
Yeah.
Because I think that there is a very easy ability to, people don't tell the emperor when there's no clothes, and you just gotta have some people you really trust that will tell you. I was reading one of the Bradstone books on Amazon, and there's an anecdote in there where, Jeff Bezos is pushing down on his team this idea of a single vintage hamburger, made from one cow.
Yeah.
And it actually gets down the path through Amazon, somebody looking into this, and it's you got to have somebody on the team being hey man,
what are we doing?
What are we doing here? Right? You kind of need somebody that can do that in a way that works for you as a founder.
One last question for you. It's kind of a two-parter. I wrote down something that you talked about in a recent interview with Wharton. You said you were speaking about transitioning from the investor to the operator, and you mentioned the importance of viscerally understanding customer pain points. So first, do you have any tactics for really viscerally understanding customer pain points, especially in the early days? What did you learn from that process? And then two, do you feel like founders struggle with this even today?
Yeah. So the answer to both those questions is yes. The best, you have to just be talking to your customers, and try to get inside their mind and really understand who you're building for and what they care about, and be able to hold that in your head as across all of the decisions you have to make as a company. And so in the early days, it's literally user interviews. It depends on what the category is, but it's, can you face-to-face talk to people? If not, can you call them? If not, can you email with them? It's doing customer service tickets, which I have always found to be the most interesting, and that's easy to do all the way as your company scales.
Right.
Right. And so take an hour a week or 2 hours a week or a half day a week, and take phone calls, or respond to tickets. You'll very quickly understand what's wrong with your product, when there's opportunities to make it better, and you'll really understand what your customers care about. But you got to find time for that, because it becomes easy if it's not something you really, really, really make front and center early. It can become easy to kind of say, oh, my marketer, my product person, my market research person is going to kind of do that. But there's no substitute for just deeply understanding not only where your product is gapped, but maybe more importantly, which people don't spend their time on, is why are people using my product, and why do they continue to use that, is equally important, because you understand what they value, and those are some of your best kind of sources of insights. But I think it's really important.
Well, Eric, thank you so much for joining me. I learned a ton. Appreciate you taking the time out.
Yeah, thanks for having me.